It was just past midnight when Detective Marcus Ramirez parked his unmarked Chevy Impala behind the abandoned warehouse on Bellamy Street. For months, he had cultivated an inside source within the Marquez cartel, using every ounce of patience and grit to build the case. Tonight was supposed to be the culmination. Federal agents, DEA task force officers, and uniformed patrol cars lying in wait for the moment the cartel's money courier stepped through that rusted loading dock door. Inside the warehouse, under the harsh glare of sodium lights, crates stamped electronics awaited inspection. Ramirez checked his watch, 2:07 a.m., then tapped the intercom. All teams in position. Courier expected in 5. He glanced at his partner, Lieutenant Elena Vasquez, whose calm demeanor belied her nerves. Together they had spent endless nights mapping shipments and interrogating low-level dealers. Now, victory lay within arm's reach. But before the arrest could be made, the raid erupted in chaos. Flashbangs detonated, agents stormed in, and Ramirez charged forward, only to be tackled from behind. He heard shouts, "Drop the weapon!" Confused, he heard the metallic rattling of handcuffs. As agents secured him, he heard a voice bark over the commotion. "Detective Ramirez, you are under arrest for soliciting a $5 million bribe to call off this operation." His protests were drowned by the whir of cameras and the roar of bright spotlights. Moments later, Ramirez stood in the middle of the loading dock, hands cuffed behind his back, as a federal prosecutor read out the charges. "We have incontrovertible evidence," the prosecutor announced, "including surveillance photos of you receiving a briefcase of marked bills, phone records tying you to the takedown, and lab reports confirming your fingerprints on the bribe ledger." Reporters' flashbulbs popped in the darkness, and the word corrupt blazed on live television crawls. Within hours, headlines splashed across every news outlet. Top detective accused of $5 million payoff. Lawman or lawbreaker, trust shattered. Ramirez's captain suspended him immediately. His badge and firearm were stripped at the precinct door. He was escorted under guard to a holding cell in the federal courthouse, past rows of gawking onlookers. Through the barred window, he glimpsed the city that had once trusted him, now turned its back. Back home in his modest two-bedroom house, Ramirez's daughter Sophia lay asleep, unaware that the man who tucked her into bed just hours before was now branded a criminal. His wife, Marisol, had collapsed in tears when she saw the news. "They've got the wrong person," he had assured her, voice thick with emotion. "I'm coming home." But even as he spoke, fear knotted in his gut. The evidence looked damning, the witnesses unflinching, and the machinery of justice, once his ally, had become his most implacable adversary. Left alone in the sterile cell, Marcus Ramirez closed his eyes and replayed every moment leading up to the raid. How had the briefcase of cash appeared in his car? How could his fingerprints be on the ledger? The sting meant to unmask the cartel had turned on him instead. In that crushing instant, the only thing standing between his daughter's future and a life behind bars was the truth, and no one would believe it was anything but a lie. Yet, as the echoes of the heavy cell door slammed shut, Ramirez made a vow. He would prove his innocence, expose the real conspirators, and reclaim the badge that defined him, or die trying. Marcus Ramirez awoke to the clank of metal on concrete and the harsh glare of fluorescent lights bouncing off the gray cinder-block walls. His uniform had been replaced by a thin jumpsuit emblazoned with inmate numbers, and the air reeked of disinfectant and stale coffee. He lay on the narrow cot in cell 17B, the sheets stiff and scratchy, replaying the memory of agents hauling him away from the warehouse. Each loop of those few seconds burned hotter in his mind than any interrogation. Through the barred window, he caught the sunrise glinting off the courthouse dome, so near yet impossibly distant. He thought of his daughter Sophia, just 6 years old, now hearing whispers in her classroom about Daddy the bribe taker. He thought of Marisol, pacing their empty living room in last night's clothes, tears streaking her cheeks. Shame and anger warred within him. He had served 20 years on the force, built a reputation for integrity, and here he was, condemned by evidence he knew wasn't his. By mid-morning, the noise of the cell block had settled into a constant hum. Inmates arguing over trivial debts, guards barking orders, the clatter of trays in the mess hall. Marcus rose and paced the narrow floor, determined not to let despair take root. He approached the metal bars and caught the eye of an older inmate, a retired judge serving time for embezzlement, who offered a sympathetic nod before turning back to his Sudoku. Marcus realized that here, in these halls, the system fed on isolation. If he remained silent, he would be devoured. That afternoon, he got his first taste of the legal machinery turned against him. His court-appointed public defender, a weary man named Ellis, met him in a cramped interview room. Ellis leafed through file jackets bulging with prosecution exhibits, photos of Marcus handling the briefcase, forensic reports tracing his fingerprints on the ledger, phone logs time-stamped to the minute. "Mr. Ramirez," Ellis sighed, "this is airtight. I can ask for a delay, but without counter-evidence, I can't see how we win." Marcus leaned forward, voice low but fierce. "I've been set up," he said. "My car was broken into. That briefcase was planted. Someone doctored those phone records. You have to believe me." Ellis's eyes darted to the door, wary of promises that might shatter his own hope. "I believe you're innocent," he said finally. "But belief doesn't beat forensic science." Left with nowhere else to turn, Marcus resolved to take control of his defense. He drafted a handwritten letter to his sister, Elena, a tenacious appellate attorney with the state public defender's office, summoning her to save him. He implored her to dig into surveillance footage, subpoena internal communications, and look for the fingerprints of the true conspirators. Late that night, under the flickering light of a jailhouse desk lamp, he penned another missive to Theo Nguyen, an investigative journalist who had once lauded his corruption-busting work. If anyone could shine a light on the precinct's backroom dealings, it was Theo. Days passed before Marcus received a reply. Through the prison's clattering mail slot, he got a stamped, typed response from Elena. "On the case. Hang in there." And a scribbled note from Theo. "Call me at your next phone time. I've found anomalies in the evidence chain." Those single sheets of paper carried more weight than all the prosecution exhibits combined. For the first time since his arrest, Marcus felt the stirrings of hope. Over the next week, Elena worked around her caseload, pulling overtime to assemble teams to request video from the warehouse perimeter cameras, fingerprints from the evidence room, and phone company logs. Theo, in turn, pored over public records and interviewed low-level officers who whispered of odd locker combinations and unlogged evidence entries. Through prison phone calls, 5 minutes at dusk and 5 more at dawn, Marcus directed their efforts, recalling every conversation he'd had in the precinct, every routine that the dirty players had twisted to frame him. Back in the cell, he practiced his testimony, sharpening his memory of the night's events. He recounted how he'd checked in with the DEA supervisor at 2 a.m., an alibi supported by timestamps on agency radios, and how his car's GPS logs placed him at the warehouse's southwest entrance, not by the courier's door where the briefcase appeared. He went over the chain of custody for the marked bills and questioned how fingerprints from days earlier could have ended up on a freshly printed ledger. Though the jail bars separated him from the world he once protected, Marcus refused to be silenced. He scribbled notes on the back of legal pads, affixed them to the cell walls with leftover soap, and spent every waking minute plotting the downfall of the conspiracy that had ensnared him. Isolation became his ally, sharpening his focus rather than breaking his spirit. Late one night, he pressed his ear to the bars and whispered into the corridor's emptiness, "I will clear my name. I will expose the truth, and when I do, they'll know the cost of framing a man of integrity." In that vow, echoing off cold concrete, Marcus Ramirez found the strength to stand firm against the system that sought to bury him, and to fight back with every ounce of resolve he had left. By the time Marcus Ramirez walked free on bail, the chill of late autumn had seeped into the city streets, crisp winds rattling the bare branches outside his rented studio apartment. Inside, a single desk lamp illuminated stacks of manila folders, surveillance stills, and notebooks scrawled with frantic timelines. His sister, Elena, hovered over her laptop, eyes bloodshot from days of all-nighters. Across the room, Theo Nguyen traced red lines on a wall-sized whiteboard, connecting names, dates, and places with thin strips of tape. Marcus settled into a creaky chair and cleared his throat. What do we have? His voice sounded hollow in the echoing space, the gravity of betrayal still sinking in. Elena swiveled her screen toward him. We've obtained warehouse CCTV from 3 angles. See here, she pointed to a grainy, time-stamped frame. Your car's dash cam shows no briefcase when you arrive at 2:02 a.m. But at 2:15 a.m., moments before your arrest, an unmarked van pulls up on the opposite side. A masked figure, gloved, slides a briefcase into your passenger door. She tapped her finger on the monitor. That's when your prints could have been planted. Theo stepped forward, dropping a sheaf of printed emails onto the desk. I hacked into the precinct's evidence management system. Look at these metadata logs. Exhibit 12 was entered at 3 a.m. by user Vasquez E. Yet the official chain of custody report says it was sealed at 1:45 a.m. Someone backdated the entry to cover their tracks. He highlighted a line in yellow. Entry created 2020 X-0 7-310 30012 by Vasquez E. Marcus felt his heart race. Elena leaned in. Vasquez, your partner, has motive. She was facing an internal probe for skimming seized drug money funds. If you'd made the bust, her operation would have been exposed. Theo nodded. And there's more. I tracked phone pings. Captain Leland's phone moved from station headquarters to the warehouse and back again, during the exact window of the alleged bribe. He claimed he was on desk duty. Marcus closed his eyes, recalling long hours working side by side with both Vasquez and Leland. They set me up to save themselves, he murmured. Their next step was urgent. Secure sworn statements from the warehouse security guards and lab technicians. Elena tapped out subpoenas requesting unredacted personnel files and shift logs. Theo arranged clandestine interviews with 2 low-level precinct clerks, offering anonymity in exchange for testimony. One clerk, through a phone-distorted voice, confirmed receiving an order from Vasquez to process the evidence drawer at 3 a.m. and then destroy the original log. As night deepened, Marcus and Theo slipped out for a covert visit to the precinct's evidence locker. Under cover of darkness, Theo filmed while Marcus, using his old security badge and intimate knowledge of the layout, unbolted the rear service door. Inside, crates of marked bills lay in a locked cage. Theo's camera caught the lock's serial number. An identical lock and key were found in Vasquez's desk drawer during a parallel search. Returning to the apartment, they laid out every piece of evidence on the whiteboard. CCTV frames, log discrepancies, phone tower pings, key serials, and the clerk's whispered confession. Each matched a point in their timeline, exposing the conspiracy like cracks in a dam. Marcus traced a thick red line from the masked figure's handoff of the briefcase to Vasquez's fingerprint on the evidence room lock. Elena tapped her laptop. I'm drafting an amended motion for immediate discovery. These exhibits will obliterate the prosecution's case. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. We need to move fast before they can bury these leads. Marcus gathered the photographs and logs, straightening them with purpose. Tomorrow, he said, voice hoarse but resolute, we hit the courthouse. We'll demand hearings on these new findings and bring Vasquez and Leland before a judge under oath. He paused, looking at the determined faces of his allies. They thought they could destroy my life with a false bribe, but they underestimated what happens when you trade in evidence, and I'm taking it all back. In that moment, the cluttered apartment, once a stark reminder of betrayal, became command central for his comeback. Marcus Ramirez, framed and nearly broken, now held the truth like a burning torch, and he would use it to light the path to justice. The morning sun slanted through the tall windows of courtroom 12B as Marcus Ramirez entered beside his sister, Elena, and Theo. The room buzzed with anticipation. Reporters crowded the back rows, and uniformed officers sat stiffly to one side. At the front, Judge Alvarado, A stern jurist known for her intolerance of gamesmanship presided from behind a hefty oak bench. Marcus felt the familiar weight of the badge he no longer wore, now replaced by the knot of nerves in his stomach. Elena rose first to address the court. In a crisp, unwavering voice, she moved to reopen the case, in light of newly discovered evidence of fabrication, tampering, and witness coercion. She laid out the CCTV stills, the unmarked van's arrival at 2:15 a.m., the gloved transfer of the briefcase, and the absence of any cash when Marcus first parked. She distributed printed logs, showing the metadata mismatch in the evidence room entries, and the signed affidavit from the anonymous clerk. I was ordered to backdate the ledger and destroy the original. I feared for my job. Judge Alvarado peered at the exhibits. Ms. Ramirez, she said, the prosecution will have an opportunity to respond. Marcus watched as Assistant U.S. Attorney Gilmore rose, forehead creased. But when Gilmore called his first witness, Detective Vasquez, she strode to the stand in crisp uniform, her face a mask of control. Under Elena's precise questioning, cracks appeared. Vasquez insisted she'd processed evidence according to protocol, yet phone tower pings and shift schedules placed her at the warehouse during the critical hours. When Elena produced the key serial match between Vasquez's desk and the evidence locker lock, Vasquez's hands trembled. The tension peaked when Marcus himself was called to give testimony. He spoke calmly, detailing the precise timeline of his undercover operation, the DEA radio check at 2 a.m., and the moment he'd parked his car, only to be blindsided by federal agents moments later. Theo's recorded interview with the second precinct clerk played over the courtroom speakers, a distorted voice confessing, "Lieutenant Vasquez told me to override the entry." She said, "Make it clean." At that admission, a collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Finally, the prosecution's star witness, an alleged money courier, staggered under cross-examination. When pressed by Elena, he admitted he'd been coached by Captain Leland, who promised leniency if he fingered Ramirez. His voice cracked. I was scared. Leland said my kid's safety depended on my testimony." At that, Vasquez buried her face in her hands. After closing arguments, Judge Alvarado surveyed the assembled evidence in silence. She tapped her pen against the bench, then announced, "In light of the demonstrated fabrication and tampering, this court finds sufficient cause to vacate the indictment against Marcus Ramirez. Further, the court will refer Lieutenant Vasquez and Captain Leland's conduct for criminal and administrative review." A hush fell, then a swell of relieved murmurs. Marcus felt tears sting his eyes as Elena embraced him. Reporters clamored forward for comments, but all he could manage was a firm nod. "Thank you, Your Honor." Stepping into the corridor, he inhaled deeply, tasting freedom's sharp tang. The conspiracy that had almost destroyed him lay exposed, and his fight for justice had truly begun. 2 weeks after Judge Alvarado's ruling, Marcus Ramirez walked into the newly minted office of Police Commissioner Lydia Mercado, sunlight gleaming off the polished nameplate on her door. The walls were adorned with city seals and portraits of past commissioners, but today the atmosphere crackled with change. Commissioner Mercado, herself a reformer appointed to restore public trust, rose from behind her desk and extended a hand. "Detective Ramirez," she said, voice warm but determined, "your integrity in the face of this conspiracy has not only cleared your name, but exposed rot at the heart of this department. I want you to lead our new Internal Integrity Task Force." Marcus felt the familiar weight of purpose settle onto his shoulders. "Thank you, Commissioner. I won't let you down." Within days, the task force assembled in a converted conference room at headquarters. Around the table sat Elena Ramirez as legal advisor, Theo Nguyen as media liaison, and 5 hand-picked investigators: Sergeant Leah O'Connor, a forensics ace; Detective Marco Santos, known for financial investigations; 2 veteran patrol officers with reputations for incorruptibility; and an IT specialist to trace digital trails. Marcus posted a mission statement on the whiteboard: root out corruption, restore honor, enforce transparency. Their first order of business was a top-to-bottom audit of confiscated assets accounts. Marco Santos retrieved ledgers dating back 5 years, while Leah cross-checked them with bin receipts and asset storage logs. They quickly discovered discrepancies: large cash seizures that never reached secure vaults, off-the-books expense withdrawals authorized by unnamed supervisors, and missing firearms whose paperwork had been misfiled. Meanwhile, Theo orchestrated a strategy to keep the public informed without compromising investigations. He drafted press release templates announcing the task force's formation, emphasizing that no badge places an officer above scrutiny. Local media outlets clamored for interviews, but Marcus insisted on waiting until the first corruption arrests were ready. He wanted concrete proof over promises. By mid-month, the team identified their first targets: Sergeant Davis and Officer Nguyen, no relation to Theo, both implicated in padding overtime hours and diverting seized cash into personal accounts. On a brisk Thursday morning, task force operatives, wearing plainclothes and carrying arrest warrants, swept into the precinct's locker room. In swift, coordinated moves, they escorted Davis and Nguyen into interrogation rooms. Leonard Davis, a 30-year veteran with a spotless public record, stared in disbelief as Marcus read him his rights. "You're kidding me," Davis spat. "You can't arrest me. I've got endorsements from half the brass." Marcus met his gaze evenly. "Evidence, Sergeant. It doesn't care who you know." Within hours, news of the arrests broke across radio, television, and social media. Theo released a carefully worded statement. "Today's arrests are not acts of vengeance, but of accountability. The Internal Integrity Task Force will pursue every lead to ensure our department lives up to its oath." Public reaction was mixed. Some applauded the decisive action, while others murmured about morale and loyalty. Marcus anticipated the pushback and convened a town hall meeting that evening in the precinct's restored community room. More than 200 officers, rookies and veterans alike, filled the seats. Marcus stood at the podium, flanked by Elena and Commissioner Mercado. "I know this isn't easy," he began. "Change never is. But our strength lies not in shielding misconduct, but in demanding excellence. Today, we held 2 officers accountable. Tomorrow, we will continue to root out every breach of trust, because every honest officer deserves a department they can believe in." A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd, led by the applause of the younger officers. That night, as he locked the task force's door, Marcus felt the first stirrings of institutional transformation, not just in policy, but in the ethos of the men and women in blue. Over the next 3 months, the task force brought down 4 more corrupt officers, traced hitherto unseen links to a precinct-wide evidence-tampering ring, and recovered over $1.2 million in misappropriated funds. Each case followed the same exacting protocol: exhaustive financial analysis, digital forensics, protected witness interviews, and airtight warrants drafted by Elena. Community groups began to attend monthly public safety forums, where Marcus laid out progress reports and fielded tough questions, demonstrating that transparency could build trust where secrecy once bred suspicion. Through it all, Theo curated a Hall of Integrity on the department's website, an interactive dashboard showing cases opened, cases closed, and assets recovered. Crime rates, once a source of public cynicism, began to improve as the precinct refocused on frontline policing rather than internal cover-ups. By the end of the quarter, Commissioner Mercado presented Marcus with a citation for exceptional leadership in restoring faith and integrity to the city police department. As he pinned the medal on his chest, Marcus glanced at the task force members seated behind him. Elena's steady smile, Theo's proud nod, Leah's bright eyes. They had risen from the ashes of conspiracy, forged not by vengeance, but by unwavering commitment to justice. And although the precinct's scars would take time to heal, its path forward was clear: purity of purpose and the courage to hold every badge to account. On a brisk January morning, the city's grand rotunda buzzed with anticipation as dignitaries, officers, and community leaders assembled for the swearing-in of Marcus Ramirez as police chief. A red carpet ran the length of the marble floor, flanked by honor guards in crisp uniforms. Ramirez, his once shabby suit replaced by a tailored Navy chief's uniform, stepped onto the dais beside Mayor Delgado, whose broad smile betrayed relief and hope. Mayor Delgado raised Ramirez's right hand. "Do you solemnly swear to uphold the laws of this city with integrity, to protect every citizen without fear or favor, and to root out corruption wherever it hides?" "I do," Ramirez replied, voice resonant in the hushed hall. As the oath concluded and applause thundered, Ramirez turned to face the assembly. His eyes swept over familiar faces, Elena standing proudly in the front row, Theo adjusting his camera, Commissioner Mercado offering a firm nod. In that moment, the weight of his new mantle settled on his shoulders. He was no longer a lone crusader, but the steward of an entire department, establishing transparency and accountability. That afternoon, Chief Ramirez convened his first command staff meeting in the newly refurbished conference room of headquarters. Gone were the faded wood panels, replaced by glass walls etched with the department's new credo: service, honor, integrity. Around the sleek oval table sat lieutenants and captains, some skeptical veterans, others hopeful young officers. Ramirez laid out three immediate priorities: public posting of disciplinary records, every sustained misconduct finding, internal affairs investigation, and use of force report would be summarized on the department's website. No redactions except for legally protected details. Mandatory body camera activation. All uniformed patrol officers must record every citizen encounter, with supervisors randomly auditing footage daily for compliance and professionalism. Civic policing forums, monthly chiefs' roundtables held in different precincts, where residents could voice concerns, offer feedback, and observe open data dashboards on crime and disciplinary actions. When a murmured objection arose, "Won't this damage morale?" Ramirez met Lieutenant Harper's gaze. "Morale built on secrets is false comfort. We rebuild trust by showing we have nothing to hide." His calm conviction silenced the room. Reforming recruitment and training. Within 2 weeks, Ramirez partnered with the Human Resources Division to overhaul recruitment. Gone were the old fast-track hires favored by political endorsements. In their place, a merit-based panel comprising community members, veteran officers, and external ethics advisors would evaluate every candidate's record, character references, and community service history. Simultaneously, the training academy's curriculum was rewired. Basic firearms drills and legal refresher courses remained, but newly added modules on de-escalation tactics, cultural competency, and implicit bias awareness became core requirements. Ramirez personally delivered the opening lecture on integrity in action, recounting his own journey from framed detective to reformist chief. Cadets sat rapt, many taking notes as he emphasized that the badge demands more than authority. It demands honor. Reorienting the precincts, Chief Ramirez then turned his attention to the precincts themselves. He ordered the reinstatement of neighborhood beat assignments, so officers would patrol the same streets week after week, building personal relationships rather than chasing statistics. In Station 3, where crime had spiked amid decades of mistrust, he flew in a mobile trust trailer, a modified SWAT vehicle now serving as a rolling public relations office, complete with tablets for filing anonymous tips and scheduling ride-along sessions. At each precinct, officers reported directly to newly appointed integrity lieutenants, whose sole responsibility was to monitor body cam usage, oversee citizen complaints, and conduct surprise inspections of evidence rooms. Ramirez made clear to every officer, if you fear oversight, then you have something to hide. First tests of leadership. Within a month, the new policies faced their first real test. A viral video showed an officer using profanity during a traffic stop. Normally, such an incident would be quietly resolved or swept under the rug. Now, the clip was embargoed behind the department's portal and immediately reviewed by an integrity lieutenant. Within 48 hours, the officer received counseling and a reprimand filed in his online record, visible to the public. Ramirez personally reached out to the complainant, offering an apology and pledging to retrain the officer in de-escalation. When social media criticism erupted, now cops are micromanaged. Ramirez responded in a live-streamed interview, "Our goal isn't to punish honest officers, it's to reinforce that professionalism is non-negotiable. Every citizen deserves respect, and every officer deserves clear standards." Early impacts. By the end of Chief Ramirez's first quarter, early metrics showed promising signs. A 25% drop in use of force complaints, a 40% increase in community tip submissions via the trust trailer, and positive feedback from precinct town halls. Though some veteran officers grumbled about the extra scrutiny, new recruits expressed pride in serving a department that held itself to higher ideals. As spring approached, Ramirez walked the corridors of headquarters with quiet satisfaction. He paused before a vast glass wall etched with names of fallen officers, and beneath it, a smaller plaque quoting his favorite credo: "The measure of a department is not how it acts in the darkness, but how it stands in the light." And as he turned to prepare for another round of precinct visits, he reflected on his unlikely journey, from falsely accused detective to the reformist chief determined to purge his precinct of its past and lead it toward a future defined by trust, transparency, and true service. The late summer sun hung low over Precinct 7's newly refurbished lobby as Chief Marcus Ramirez stepped to the podium before the precinct's first ever civilian oversight board. The room, once dingy and distrustful, gleamed with fresh paint and warm neutrals, walls adorned with community-sourced murals depicting neighborhood life. In folding chairs arrayed before him sat clergy, neighborhood association leaders, business owners, youth group representatives, and officers who had weathered the department's storm of reform. Cameras from local news outlets lined the back wall, poised to broadcast this historic first. Marcus inhaled deeply, the crisp air carrying the murmurs of expectation. At his side stood Deputy Chief Leah O'Connor, head of Internal Integrity, and Pastor Angela Kim, chair of the board. He cleared his throat. "Thank you all for joining me today. 1 year ago, this precinct was mired in scandal. Corruption had eroded trust, and our community's faith in the badge was all but shattered. We made a promise to hold every officer accountable, to embrace transparency, and to rebuild from the ground up. I'm proud to report that, to date, 5 officers have been disciplined for misconduct. 4 have faced criminal charges, and over $2 million in misappropriated funds has been recovered and returned to our community programs." A ripple of applause swept through the room. Marcus paused to let the weight of those numbers settle, a stark contrast to the secrecy of days past. "But purging corruption is only half the battle," he continued. "True reform means healing the wounds left behind. That's why today I'm unveiling the next phase of our initiative: Community-First Policing Partnerships." He clicked a remote, and a large screen illuminated with a map of the precinct, segmented into neighborhood zones. Icons marked Youth Outreach, Elder Check-ins, Business Watch, and Cultural Liaisons. Each zone would host a dedicated team, composed of 1 officer, 1 board member, and 1 civilian volunteer, tasked with monthly events: park cleanups with high school clubs, coffee hours for seniors, storefront security workshops for merchants, and cultural fairs celebrating the precinct's rich diversity. Pastor Kim stepped forward. "These partnerships will foster daily contact, not just during crises, but in the simple, human moments where trust grows. Laughing with kids, listening to veterans' stories, sharing a meal after a neighborhood barbecue." Behind them, a table displayed the first printed reports from the precinct's new transparency portal. Interactive dashboards showing real-time use of force data, complaint resolutions, and progress metrics for each partnership zone. Community members could log on anytime to track reforms, submit feedback, and propose new initiatives. In the weeks that followed, the precinct hummed with renewed energy. Officer Santos hosted a Soccer with the Chief event at Jefferson Park, dribbling alongside teens as they joked about his surprisingly nimble footwork. Detective Lewis and Ms. Alvarez, a local business owner, co-facilitated a shop-safe workshop where merchants learned both loss prevention techniques and officers listened to security concerns over homemade empanadas. The elder check-ins, monthly home visits to shut-ins, evolved into intergenerational tea socials, where great-grandparents taught traditional crafts to cadets in uniform. Not every event was flawless. At a civic dialogue in the precinct's basement auditorium, heated debates flared over lingering mistrust. Some residents cited past abuses too fresh to forget. Ramirez sat on a panel alongside board members, fielding tough questions with empathy and humility, acknowledging mistakes, sharing steps taken to prevent recurrences, and inviting residents to co-design solutions. Cameras rolled, live streams drew hundreds of comments, and while some critics remained skeptical, many commended the openness of the exchange. 6 months into the program, precinct surveys revealed dramatic shifts. A 60% decrease in 911 complaints about police conduct, a 45% rise in ticketed, citizen-initiated calls for suspicious activity, a measure of community investment, and an 80% approval rating for local officers, up from a dismal 30% the previous year. On a crisp autumn evening, Marcus returned to the mural-lined lobby for the precinct's second anniversary celebration. He watched a slideshow of photos, officers laughing with children at Halloween trick-or-treat booths, neighbors dancing at a summer concert sponsored by the precinct, teens receiving future officer certificates after completing a mentorship program. As he looked into the faces of the crowd, families, pastors, students, and officers, he realized that the precinct had transformed from an adversary into an ally. Stepping to the mic, he offered a final reflection. We began this journey by tearing down corrupt walls. Tonight, we celebrate the bridges we've built, between badge and citizen, between history and hope. Our work is never done, but together we've shown that accountability and compassion can coexist, and that the badge, when worn with honor, can be a true force for good. A standing ovation filled the lobby, the applause echoing like a new heartbeat, steady, inclusive, and brimming with promise. As the crowd mingled under the warm glow of overhead lanterns, Chief Ramirez knew that Precinct's darkest chapter had given way to a brighter narrative, one of redemption, partnership, and enduring trust between the police and the community they vowed to protect.